welcome first of all, Derek.
Very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Such a privilege to have you as our guest expert in the NetElixir University's second annual guest expert series. We do this series, Derek, for a very unique reason. It's a very firm belief, as we have really built the company, that there is so much that we don't know. And we, honestly speaking, are lucky enough to have experts like you really sort of stimulate us, inspire us with your thinking, with the way that you think, the work that you do, etc. Last year we had a physicist, as we were talking about, and today we have a very renowned entrepreneur plus a startup professor or a startup teacher. We have someone who has made an incredible contribution, in my opinion, to the entire world of entrepreneurship, startup leadership, etc. So we have Professor Derek Lidow from Princeton University. Derek, I don't know, it's very difficult for me to define, honestly speaking. He is not only a long-time CEO, he also is an expert entrepreneur who actually sold his last company, iSupply, to IHS for more than $100 million. He teaches entrepreneurial leadership, creativity, and innovation at Princeton University. And he has several patents in the electronic industry and an expert. Derek, I must say, to even mention that I am privileged, it's probably an understatement, but thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Derek. And before we start off, I really would sort of base a lot of my questions today to this absolutely incredible book called The Startup Leadership. Actually, this is how I really got to know Derek, right? I sort of found this book, which was very highly rated on Amazon, and I said that let me try to sort of figure out who this gentleman is, and it so happens that he lives just about 5 miles away from us, or 3 miles away from us. So it's a very lucky coincidence, but thank you so much again. What I'll try to do is we'll make it more of a fireside chat sort of a session, so we'll have a lot of Q&A, etc., etc. The idea is to essentially inspire a sort of a brainstorming, a sort of a thinking, which can be incredibly valuable to anyone in the leadership position, whether that person is an entrepreneur or works within the company, etc. So I'll start with my first question, and it's a fairly naive one. Are there any prerequisites for being an entrepreneur? Are there any prerequisites for entrepreneurship? Or is it just anyone can really become an entrepreneur?
Right. So I'm going to step back for a moment and just make sure that we're calibrated on the term entrepreneurship, which actually means a lot of things to different people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's a widely used term. And it has many different definitions that can be used sometimes all at the same time. Mm-hmm. The Webster's dictionary calls an entrepreneur is somebody who creates a company, that starts a company. But in the usage in the press, it is often associated with somebody that is trying to do something disruptive or something that has a huge impact. Mm-hmm. And that's a suitable use of the word, but it's not necessarily one that applies in the broadest fashion. In the US, at any point in time, there are about 5 million people trying to start a company.
Wow. Okay.
And there are 700,000 new companies started every year.
Wow. And
only a very small fraction of those are companies really started with the sole intent of being highly disruptive, potentially being worth $1 billion. We're talking about maybe a few dozen companies a year with that type of ambition. So when you say what sort of traits are, might be required, and you look at the data in terms of entrepreneurs in general, people that start and run successful companies, you can't find any traits that make one entrepreneur more successful than another. Mm-hmm. Now, when you get into the high risk, high valuation, super high growth aspiration type of companies, well then maybe you're having enormously technically acute skills does make a big difference. But again, that applies to such a few instances every year that it's probably not worth,
Right.
delving in, or certainly not worth saying to anybody, oh, you can't be an entrepreneur because your IQ isn't 180.
Very interesting. So actually I was very fascinated, Derek, by your line that you mention in your book, The Startup Leadership, that it's your belief that it is not about the ideas which really interests you as much, it is more about the people. Right? So can you explain a little bit more on this?
Well, that's another often misconception, is that, oh, I'm just waiting to think of my idea or to find an idea so that I can start a company. When in actuality, it's more about the people that are going to make you successful than any idea. And there's a wonderful example of this that I think almost proves the point, that perhaps the most important idea of all in the 20th century was the invention of the transistor, done not too far from here in New Jersey. And it was invented by some physicists at Bell Labs. The leader of that team, who won a Nobel Prize for this work, William Shockley, was widely regarded as the smartest guy in all of electronics. And he wanted the transistor to be his personal legacy. So he left Bell Labs to start a company just to make transistors. He recruited the smartest people he knew. He even made sure they were as smart as he knew because he made them take IQ tests.
Oh, wow.
So, and he goes and he founds this company, by the way, not in New Jersey where he lived, but next to his mother, who happened to live in Palo Alto, California.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Silicon Valley today is where it is because of William Shockley's mother. But he takes this group of the smartest engineers in the country, moves them out to Palo Alto to be next to his mother, and he sets back the electronics revolution by years. Nothing happens. He calls the people that he recruited stupid after he gave them IQ tests. He changes his mind constantly. Nothing happens with this fabulous idea with all the smartest people. So the best idea in the hands of a very poor or incompetent leader goes nowhere. But you can take very mundane ideas or very normal ideas. Look at all the great entrepreneurs that happen all the time in the food industry. And the food entrepreneurs have been around for millennia. So it's not about the idea, it's really about getting a lot of people excited by your vision of how you can bring value and happiness to large groups of people. And if you can get a lot of people motivated to help you, then your chances of making a dent in the universe and being a successful entrepreneur go sky high.
Very, very interesting, Derek. So on the same line, I think the most immediate example which comes to my mind is Apple. With Steve Jobs, and we all know about his leadership legacy again. So there has been a lot of discussion in terms of the idea as well as the leadership of Steve Jobs.
Right.
So isn't it a combination of both these factors at play as it applies to Apple?
So certainly the idea impacts the potential size of your company and how fast it can grow. So it certainly has, plays a very significant role in terms of the potential. But it doesn't play a role in terms of the chances of success.
Nice.
So there are three things that really are triumvirate of determining ultimately how far you can go as an entrepreneur. There's the idea, there's your leadership ability, and then there's your team, the initial team that you create. And you bring up Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was actually a brilliant leader, and one of the most important ways was that he realized that he wasn't person to lead Apple, particularly at first. So he was very brash and not scared or intimidated to go and introduce himself to the smartest and most famous people in the field. Sometimes he had to be pretty obnoxious to get a meeting with him, but he did. And they gave him a lot of feedback that said, hey, you're not going to do it. But why don't you find somebody who does know about marketing or does know about operations? And to his credit, great credit, he went and he introduced himself to these highly capable people. So Mark Markula was somebody he hired to be his CEO. The first CEO of Apple was Mark Markula. And Mark Markula had great experience from Intel and the like, and he knew exactly what to do to scale up making PCs. So Steve Jobs' first brilliant move as a leader was choosing somebody that would work with him and would share his vision. So it's the three that determine how far or how valuable something can be.
Fascinating, fascinating. So you have had quite an interesting entrepreneurial journey as well, right? So I mean, you have obviously a very strong academic background. You did your PhD in physics, I believe, from Stanford, and then you joined the company. So can you share with us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey? I mean, from a PhD in physics in Stanford to an entrepreneur to a professor is fascinating.
Yes. So I graduated Stanford a long time ago. We're talking about in the 70s. But that happened to be the start of the golden age of the semiconductor industry. And I rapidly was recruited into the semiconductor industry and spent quite a bit of my career doing many different jobs within the semiconductor industry, from engineer and R&D person to manufacturing manager and sales and marketing. I had the opportunity to do all the jobs, and I did them well, and so I would be promoted, and eventually I became CEO of a very large semiconductor company called International Rectifier, and I helped grow that company to be global, and we had factories in 9 different countries around the world. We produced hundreds of millions of semiconductors on a monthly basis. So it was a very large, very successful concern. Having had a tenure at that point of more than 20 years in the semiconductor industry, there were certain ideas that I had about how to make the semiconductor industry better and stronger that I became really intrigued with. And ultimately I felt that I needed to put my money where my mouth was. And so I founded a company that was called iSupply to provide all of the things that I had wanted as CEO and nobody could give me the answers for. So I started the company to provide the answers that I pretty much knew that other fellow semiconductor CEOs would want to know. That was the good news, and yes, they did want that information. The challenge was that it was at the height of the dot-com bubble activity, and then the dot-com bubble collapse, and then the 9/11 tragedy, and then not that many years later, the Lehman Brothers collapse. So it proved to be a very challenging time, but because the information that we were providing to the industry, which had never been available before, was useful, we succeeded, and despite everything that the environment threw at us. And eventually our information became must-have, gold standard. We sold to absolutely every company in the whole high-tech industry around the world, and everybody that invested in high-tech and the like. So the company became successful and was was sold successfully. And then shortly after that deal was announced, I got a call from the Dean of Engineering from Princeton University saying, would you be interested to come to Princeton and help us expand our entrepreneurship programs? So I really was quite shocked by that call, but it sounded like a very exciting thing to do as yet another chapter in my life. What I was shocked to find when I came to teach at Princeton was how little was available in teaching leadership to entrepreneurs. It was not a topic that was widely discussed. You could find lots of books on how to get venture capital financing, but you couldn't find hardly anything, really anything, about how you spot talent, how you hire talent, how you motivate, how you find out what your own capabilities are so that you can create a complementary team. These things weren't talked about. So fortunately.
That's very, very interesting, Derek, because I mean, during our conversation prior to this this chat, you mentioned that less than 1% or a fraction of 1% of the companies get funded by a VC, right? And yet there are tons of books, and every company which is getting started or is in existence needs a leader. Yet there is a huge gap that seems. That's quite fascinating.
It's a huge gap. So at any point in time, there are probably 4 million people that are attempting to start a company in the United States, 4 million. About 700,000 companies a year are started. By the way, the number of companies that are being started per year in the United States is dropping. Right. So entrepreneurship is not growing. It's actually contracting in the U.S. Or at least the entrepreneurship, there are more people that are interested in being entrepreneurs than there are trying it, but there are fewer people that are actually forming companies. And then even fewer still of those companies are being financed by professional investors. So 700,000 companies a year approximately. And the VC industry funds about 1,200, 1,400 new companies in a year, 0.2%. So that's a very small number.
It's nothing.
Now, certainly it's something that anybody is invited to aspire to, but there are far less risky ways to start companies with the exact same potential. If you have a venture capitalist investing in your company, it doesn't improve your chances of success. What it does is it improves your chances of growing quickly. So in certain industries where there are network effects or economies of scale, that rapid growth phase can give you a distinct competitive advantage. And therefore, that makes venture capital financing a great, if not a requirement, to have for those very specific types of companies. But other than that, your chances of success are just as good, and the chances of their company being just as large as a VC-backed company over a period of more years, but it will get to the same size.
It's very interesting because just sort of thinking aloud, I mean, you are talking about multiple things. So you talked about entrepreneurship actually is on the decline, right? You talked about the chances of success if you are funded by a VC being the same as, let us say, if you are sort of going into
Long-term,
the third thing I believe is, which is, I mean, I think all of us really know of it, that we are so charmed by these unicorns, right? All these unicorn concepts, the media creating a huge hype, etc., etc. Is it actually proving to be detrimental to entrepreneurship in US? That because people are that big spark create another, when they probably would have succeeded, had they really come up with something which was a lot more relevant, without essentially trying to be yet another unicorn and trying to get a VC investment.
Right.
I mean, any observations on that?
Right. So I like to think of entrepreneurs in two both very relevant categories. One is the high-risk entrepreneur. And that's the entrepreneur that is very ambitious and wants to grow very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you need venture capital, but there are relatively few successful high-risk entrepreneurs. By the way, if you aspire to do it that way, your chances of success go way down. Why? Because everybody tends to do similar things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So high-risk entrepreneurs, big potential payback, very high risk, low chances of success. Then the more traditional type of entrepreneur is really the bedrock entrepreneur. They generate 90% of all the value generated by startups are these bedrock entrepreneurs who really don't like risk. They're quite patient. So they believe in slow and steady growth.
Yeah.
They do things that they have tremendous expertise in, confidence in, and that they already have a very good sense of where they're going to create their value. And the percentage of those that survive and become successful is quite large, depending on the exact field, can be sometimes over 50-50.
Interesting, very, very interesting. Now, I know I sort of started with this session by sort of referring to your book, Startup Leadership, right? What are, I mean, if I were to sort of request you to give a quick nutshell for our audiences too, what are some of the key concepts that you have shared in the book? What would the top 3 or 5 things be, which I can really, our audience can benefit from?
Right. So, the most important thing is that it's leadership that is the greatest determinant of entrepreneurial success, which we have been talking about. The other really important thing is that leadership is a set of skills. It's not traits. It's not something that you need to be born with. It's not charisma. It's actually, in the case of entrepreneurial leaders, 5 very specific skills. And these skills can be trained. You can learn them. If you have a good coach, you can get probably pretty good at them. So the 5 skills are, first of all, self-awareness. Understanding what your capabilities are so that you understand what you're going to contribute to the team you're going to form and what you will expect others to contribute. So self-awareness. The second one is a skill of relationship building. So relationship building is how you create a new relationship and how you can make existing relationships more powerful. Both your own relationships, but if you're the leader of others, you can help others create more powerful relationships as well. So relationship building is an extremely valuable skill to know. The third is what I call motivating others. Relationship building is about building relationships one-on-one. And motivating others is how you create excitement on large groups of people to ultimately do the things that you want them to do to help you support your vision. And it's doing it in such a way that it's extremely rewarding to them. It feels good. It feels like the right thing for them to be doing. So it's about aligning your, your purpose with their purpose and the like. It's about making sure that you help them be successful, feel like they're being successful. These are things that you can do to motivate large groups of people. So that's the third skill. The fourth skill is one of leading change, because in a startup, things change very rapidly. But people in general, everybody, does not like change. Change is risky, change is hard, change is annoying. So it's quite difficult to get people to embrace change. And that's a huge skill for a leader to have, is understanding exactly what you do to make people feel comfortable in adopting change rather than resisting it. And then the fifth skill is very specific to entrepreneurial leaders, and that's understanding just the basics of how an enterprise creates value and how enterprises mature in stages. So an enterprise matures just like a child, and you wouldn't think about serving pizza to an infant, okay? And you wouldn't, make teenagers very excited about eating baby food, okay?
Yeah.
So you have to feed the enterprise exactly the right types of leadership at the right stages of its maturity, as it goes from being just your idea, just that idea, to ultimately being something that produces value and is completely self-sustainable. It can keep growing on its own. So those are the skills, and that's a really important thing to understand, is that these are things you can learn. These are things that you can master and get better at, and that you can practice.
So I'm just sort of thinking of, again, for our audience's benefit. The first one is self-awareness, knowing what I'm good at. Right?
Yeah.
The second is connecting, a relationship. The third one is motivating the bigger purpose or the idea. Fourth one,
Leading change.
is basically leading change, because basically evolution, everything really changes. And what was the fifth one?
Fifth one is what I call enterprise basics, understanding how enterprises mature. And
What is needed at a different particular stage. Now, if I were to take, let us say, one very successful entrepreneur, right? Again, I sort of hate to keep on repeating Steve Jobs and stuff, but I think he has such a cult figure. I think it's an easy example. How does a person like, let us say, Stephen Jobs fit in this? And on the other hand, where have you seen most of the companies or the entrepreneurs who have not been successful? Is there any particular segment where most people have faltered or failed?
Right.
What seems to be the biggest impediment, in your opinion, out of these 5 stages?
Right. So, in understanding Steve Jobs, because he's well known and his story is well known, and there's a lot of good biographies, although some people prefer one biography to
I'm a huge fan as well, so sorry, pardon my repeated references to Steve Jobs.
And so he does serve as an interesting model here.
Yeah.
And he was very intuitive in being a good entrepreneurial leader at the beginning, in choosing the people that he motivated to come join him, in delegating, in realizing that he wasn't good at certain things at the beginning. Yes, he had some rough edges. He could scream at people and the like, so his relationship building skills were, adequate.
Relationship, I mean, for example, was a very clear case, right? So connecting.
So, exactly. And you don't have to be world class in all of these skills. You just have to be just masterful enough. But ultimately, the combination of pressure and intensity of Apple and Apple growing, he lost or forgot some of these skills later. So when he developed the Mac, he did it in such a way that it actually drove the company apart rather than brought the company together. And he became very difficult for the leadership to work with, to the point where when the Mac was not a financial success initially, it was a financial drain on the company. A company that was already struggling financially. He was fired. And his attempts to recreate Apple with the next computer were also unsuccessful, because he again did not listen to his key experts on design issues with the next computer that made the computer too costly and slow and light in memory, and so it had some of the exact same deficits that the original caused the original Mac to fail. So he just repeated that failure. And it wasn't until he came close to bankruptcy and simultaneously fell in love with a wonderful person that he started to open up again and question his own values. So he revisited his self-awareness and realized that he had been doing things that were quite destructive rather than value add in the companies. He still had the charisma that could bring in the money, but he was losing it faster than he was bringing it in. So he was very fortunate that he got a chance, because there was still some good software at Next Computer that Apple needed to come back to Apple. But when he came back to Apple, he was a changed man. He was more humble from his experience. He was more humble from having a wife that could tell him where he needed to do things a little differently. And he successfully recreated Apple in, again, another brilliant model of leadership. Yes, there was a close, tight community of a handful of people that he liked to work very closely together, and that shielded the others from some of his more eccentric or problematic relationship building styles. But that wasn't necessary. You only need to have relationship building with a handful of people. The rest you just need to motivate, using the motivating others skill, which he was brilliant at. So he came back to remember those skills that he had innately at the very beginning that he lost through hubris and stress and the like. And the world's a better place because of that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Is there any particular step that you have seen most entrepreneurs fall to?
Well,
or is it like across?
Most entrepreneurs falter in the creation of their initial teams. And where they do it in a very naive way, they may not be very self-aware, and so they might bring people in that think just like they do rather than complement their skill sets and their thinking styles. And that results in most founding teams falling apart within the first year or two. And when the team falls apart, then the company completely loses its momentum, its morale, and basically stops existing. So that's the single biggest reason. Another reason that is almost heartbreaking is that some entrepreneurs do that first stage in a brilliant fashion. But then they don't realize that their company has matured and needs them to exercise their leadership in slightly different ways. And so they never change gears. And ultimately they are doing what made them successful up to that point, but which cannot make them successful going forward. And their companies stagnate. And if a company stagnates for too long, again, its morale goes down, it starts to crumble. And so you see so many companies with such potential crumble because their leaders were just naive about how their companies needed to grow.
Very interesting. In your opinion, any change that you have seen over the last 2 decades, let us say, in terms of entrepreneurship? Specifically in the internet age versus the pre-internet age almost, right? Or still all of these 5 elements that you mentioned, are they still applicable as much as they were earlier, or has anything changed because of the internet and the fast age?
They're probably more applicable than ever because you have more companies that rely on digital technology and the like, and therefore can grow faster with less invested capital, and therefore you do get these hyper-growth situations. And so these challenges that in more classical times would take years to evolve, sometimes can evolve well within a year. And you may have to change gears in your leadership style, you know, twice in 1 year. Well, that's very demanding on any leader. You have to be incredibly skilled and aware to know to do this. And unfortunately, particularly in VC-backed companies, the way to solve it is just to fire this otherwise successful CEO and replace him with somebody that has gone through that stage before. You know, that's very unfortunate for, you know, founders. That's if they had the right coach, or maybe if they had read my book, you know, would have had a much better chance of surviving that transition.
Now, talking about your book again, the Startup Leadership book, you have something called a PLS, right? Can you explain for our audience what exactly is the PLS? I sort of took the PLS test, found it to be incredibly valuable, but I don't even know as to how many entrepreneurs or leaders are actually even benefiting from this.
Right.
So if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit on this.
So a PLS is a personal leadership strategy. And ultimately, it's just taking an inventory of your leadership skills as they exist now. And it also takes an inventory of your traits and your motivations. Because the three of those, your motivation, traits, and skills, form your capability mix. Traits are the things that you're more or less born with or that develop early in your development, and you're going to be that way for the rest of your life. Okay? So right-handed, left-handed, but also some of the ways that you process logic in your brain. That's just how our wiring is set up, and so we need to deal with it. Our motivations are things that can change, but change relatively slowly with our life. They tend to change. They're a reflection of our innermost desires and fears, those things that we want badly enough, or want to avoid badly enough, that we take action. We initiate our own actions. So that's motivations. And then skills. Skills are ability to perform a prescribed task. We talked about 5 leadership skills. There are many other skills, the skill to multiply 2 numbers together, or to hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Those are skills, and we all have long lists of skills. So a personal leadership strategy is all about taking inventory, starting with an inventory, and realizing where you are now, objectively. Ultimately, it's best done in conjunction with somebody that you trust to be honest with you about helping you assess your abilities. And so you write down what your motivations, traits, and your skills are, and you also say, hey, look, how do I need to augment this in order to accomplish what it is that I want? With the book, hey, there are 5 leadership skills. Maybe you want to acquire or practice or get better at 1 or more of those skills. But you may aspire to start a company in a certain industry, digital marketing, and therefore you may need some more experience or to augment your skill set on social media marketing or the like. So it makes you be conscious of it. It also makes you put down a strategy that allows you to leverage your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses. So it doesn't make you fixate on any one thing. It makes you realize that it's an entire picture that you will require to fulfill your aspirations and your dreams. And investment of money or time, you can do it yourself. Strongly advise that you do it with somebody who you respect and who will give you the honest truth. I teach it to all my students. It's required as a final paper in class, but hundreds of people have done that and contacted me and told me how valuable the exercise
It's
is.
absolutely invaluable. It was like almost therapeutic. Let us just put it that way, for lack of a better word for me. So I have one question. So you claim that you are a startup teacher, right? And you emphasize the importance of the role of a mentor for an entrepreneur. Any particular stage or element where the mentor can have a stronger or a bigger impact on the entrepreneur out of all these 5 things? Can the mentor help in the self-awareness stage, or is it just a different evolution stage? What would your thoughts be on a mentor?
Well, first, I'd like, there are 3 terms that often get intermingled and confused. So there's mentor, there's coach, and advisor. Okay. So a mentor ultimately is somebody that you develop a personal relationship with, who cares about helping you be successful, usually through advice. And it's often a paternalistic type relationship that you're forming. So somebody that wants to see you be successful. And you can have many mentors, because a mentor is most useful to helping you relative to what experience they've had and the successes and failures that they have experienced. So they can be very valuable to you based upon the failures that they've had, just as much as on the successes. But somebody that might be an ideal mentor for what you're trying to accomplish in digital marketing may not be exactly also the ideal mentor for you in terms of how to acquire other companies, or how to set up international operations in France. So you can have mentors, many different mentors, for many different reasons. I contrast that with a coach. And a coach is somebody that helps somebody acquire and master a given skill, just like in sports. So a coach would be somebody that you would go to and say, hey, I want to be as good as you are someday at relationship building. Will you coach me on relationship building? And that coach will assess how you're doing, give you some suggestions on practice, and then maybe assess on how well you've advanced based upon his suggestions. So that's a coach. And an advisor is somebody that you basically pay to help you accomplish a certain task. So to augment a skill that you might not have and the like. And so they advise you on something that is particularly specific and often objective based. Let's get here. And so often advisors come and go based upon what your needs are.
Very, very, very fascinating. Well, Derek, I think we have pretty much sort of covered all the questions which I had got. I would like to sort of open it up for the audience questions. I mean, if any one of you have any questions for Derek, we would love to sort of get them now. You can also email it to us at university@netelixir.com. Derek, your Twitter handle, I believe, is @Derek Lidow.
At Derek Lidow.
At Derek Lidow, exactly. So also, since I have you here, Derek, I would love to have your autograph in this book. And Derek has a very unique sort of offer for all of our NetElixir University attendees. We'll be actually handing out 2 of the best questions, or the people who ask the best questions. Derek's autographed book, we'll actually sort of send it to you via UPS so that you sort of get a copy of his autographed and signed book as such. So that's, I think, what we had, Derek, for today's show, the expert series. Again, on the behalf of the entire NetElixir team, we are all about not only digital marketing, but inspiration and a lot of entrepreneurship as well.
Right.
This was absolutely an incredible experience. Thank you very much.
Well, my mission is to really help people be successful. And so I invite anybody that visits DerekLidow.com, to contact me through the contact page, and I answer lots of questions in life from all around the world, and that's what I enjoy doing, and that's what I want to be helping the world do a little better. So feel free to contact me.
That's incredible. Thank you very much, Derek. And again, without further ado, we'll probably sort of get a signature from you right on the screen.
Okay.
And again, if any one of you is interested in asking a question, I'll quickly probably move ahead and check if there are already some questions coming in. Oh, there is a bunch of questions. Sorry, Derek. So we'll probably have to grab the questions quickly.
Going to grab the questions. I will do this later. We'll need to focus on the more important things.
Yes, absolutely. So the first question that we have, Derek, is what would your advice be to someone who thinks like an entrepreneur and who wants to be one but can't think of an idea for a company? What steps can they take?
Okay. So the most important thing to realize about entrepreneurship is that it's about making other people happy. So entrepreneurs are people that make other people happy enough that they want to give you money to keep doing it. So the best place to start looking for ideas on how to be an entrepreneur is realizing where you are good at making other people happy. What are those skills that you have? And there may be skills that you practice at work, but they may be skills that you practice at home or with your friends. And all of those domains are very fruitful places to look for ideas. Now, I have a more formal process that I teach in my spring class called Creativity, Innovation, and Design, and it uses design thinking methodology. And I would encourage the audience to look into design thinking methodology, where you go through some easy to understand steps to help formulate raw, rough ideas into something that ultimately excites the greatest number of people. And but ultimately start asking that question: how do I make people happy? How do I know how to do that? That's a very, very powerful place to start.
That's very unique and very, very, very interesting. Thank you, Derek, for that. The second question is, how do you feel about Kickstarter, and how else can it be used besides funding?
Okay. Well, I think Kickstarter is a great organization, a great website, a great way for people to test out ideas. It's not just for raising money. It should be thought of as a way to get feedback, very pertinent and valuable feedback on an idea. Of course, to use Kickstarter properly, you should invest the time, the resources to do a good job of describing your idea for Kickstarter. It's not for it's for ideas that are developed enough that you can gauge how much emotional attraction that it creates to the Kickstarter community. So I know quite a few entrepreneurs that have used Kickstarter several times to figure out exactly which one that they would be investing their time into growing into a larger company.
Very interesting. The third and the last question that we have is lifestyle business versus a funded business. Which has a higher success rate?
Right. So bedrock entrepreneurs, which some people call them lifestyle entrepreneurs, but they're really not. Some portion of bedrock entrepreneurs are lifestyle entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs that whose biggest objective is to have a comfortable lifestyle, and that's fine. Most bedrock entrepreneurs want their companies to be as valuable as possible, and will make lifestyle sacrifices, maybe not big ones, maybe they're limited lifestyle sacrifices, but they'll still make lifestyle sacrifices for the benefit of the company and the employees of the company. So that technically wouldn't be a lifestyle person, but there's often a lot of overlap and similarities. The single biggest determinant of success is not whether it's lifestyle or outside funding, but ultimately the leadership capabilities of the founder. So that's your single biggest thing that you can do to improve your chances of success, and it will improve them by many factors, depending on which market you're targeting. So if you're an entrepreneur that is a great leader and very ambitious, but you're the 100th company that starts a ride-sharing app, your chances of success, no matter how capable you are very low, extremely low. Whereas if you're doing something which makes a lot of people happy, there's so many wonderful entrepreneurs out there with great stories of creating companies that we've all come to love based upon their skills at making food or fun entertainment and the like. That's and they're prime examples of bedrock entrepreneurs, slow and steady growth, but their chances of success are usually well in excess of 50-50.
Interesting. So I'll just sort of end with a question which I can't help asking. Who's your favorite entrepreneur?
Who's my favorite entrepreneur? The entrepreneur that I am most in awe of happens to be a Princetonian, Wendy Kopp, the founder of Teach for America. And she got that idea as a senior at Princeton and worked tirelessly and to make it a reality, made a lot of learning mistakes along the way, wrote a great book, One Day All Children, that describes that experience, and she's an example of a truly great entrepreneurial leader on a global scale.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much, Derek. It has absolutely been a privilege having you here. Again, any questions for Derek? Either tweet it directly to him at Derek Lidow, or email us university@netelixir.com. Thank you very much for joining us. That basically sort of brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.